as we all know that this election cycle is starting to intensify, and for the first time in a long time, we're seeing third-party candidates and independents really shake things up. The Libertarians are going to be having their convention on May 25th. And look, I had Larry Sharp on the show yesterday, and I am ever hopeful, as is he, that there could be a potential debate between RFK Jr. and Donald Trump. And it would be even better if the Libertarians even had their own nominee up there. So it could be a three-way debate and something that we've never seen before, especially hosted by the Libertarian Party. Will this happen? I've been messaged this and I've been told this even face to face, even got a phone call here and there and saying, Kit, look, we love your idealism, but that's never going to happen. But one can hope. But we've also seen this onslaught of attack towards third parties. You know, Dr. Jill Stein, Dr. Cornel West, RFK Jr., and very soon it'll be the Libertarians will also be put on the chopping block too. Hell, there have been attacks against the Libertarians as well. But what I've been also noticing is the huge pushback that third parties and independents have been giving towards the Democratic Party and the Republican Party. And recently, Dr. Jill Stein has called out Joe Biden. As we all know, Joe Biden's administration has been extremely critical of Netanyahu. I say air quote Netanyahu because he's saying these words, but right now that red line has been crossed. The city of Rafah, home to between 1.4 and 1.5 million refugees. Now, these men, women, and children have nowhere to go. Israel's saying that there's Hamas there, but look, 80% of Gaza is a moonscape. They found those natural gas resources off the coast of Palestine and Gaza. And what I got to say is this. They're not moving. They're not going. And this city, in which, again, people are being targeted, it's going to be a disaster. Which is why it comes as no surprise why Congress wants to silence TikTok. So if you're on board with Congress silencing TikTok, removing it, just remember that opens the Pandora's box for Twitter to be silenced, Facebook to be silenced, Instagram, YouTube. Hell, we here at Heartlands Media know what it's like to be censored and silenced and suppressed. We know it all too well, as do our colleagues in independent media across the political spectrum. But Jill Stein calls out, you guessed it, Joe 30330. So let's go ahead and pull up this video here. I think it's important that we hear this perspective. Let's play it.
This invasion of Rafah, which has begun and which can get a whole lot worse, it needs to stop now. This is blood on Joe Biden's hands, more blood on Joe Biden's hands. He can stop all of this in the blink of an eye by simply telling Israel that it's over. All of our support, the weapons, the money, the diplomatic cover, the air defense against incoming missiles for Israel, all of this needs to stop now until such time as Israel ends its assault on Gaza, ends its assault on Rafah. There are some 600,000 children that have been concentrated in Rafah, along with about 1.5 million people who've been basically herded like cattle into this small area where they are now set up like fish in a barrel for the assault from Israel. This is kind of the final chapter here, the grand finale to Israel and Joe Biden's genocide. It belongs to both of them. This wouldn't be happening without the support of the U.S. president, who needs to act like a commander-in-chief, not a secretary for Bibi Netanyahu.
Now, let's be clear here. Look, Joe Biden clearly has cognitive decline, okay? Calling him a secretary, Jill, I mean, you're being way too generous, so I have to push back on it. He's not a secretary of anything. He's not the president of anything. He's an old man that's clearly out of his element, okay? And as for this administration, I'm not expecting much from Joe Biden to do the right thing. I'm not expecting much from this administration to even call for a ceasefire, all right? And if this is a Republican administration too, no. People would not call for a ceasefire, okay? There's profits to be made. And all these warmongers want profit at the expense of human lives. There must be peace. There must be a ceasefire. But what do you expect from our two-party system? So, Jill, you're being way too generous. You're being way too generous calling him a secretary. He's supposed to shut up. And when politicians get paid off, they're supposed to be quiet.
This needs to end. It needs to end now. These children are largely injured, sick, malnourished, traumatized, disabled. They cannot be moved. They should not be shuttled to yet another refuge. While the tents that they're living in are now being struck by missiles from Israel. This is just insane. This is horror, compounding horror. And Joe Biden is pretending to be helpless. Apparently, he's now talking about withdrawing or withholding some weapons if Israel goes forward. This is not the time to talk about what you're going to do. This is a time to do it right now, to not only stop the flow of all weapons, but also to support Palestine's entry into the United Nations with the full autonomy and sovereignty of a nation. The U.S. was obstructing this as well in the recent vote that was taken in the UN Security Council. The U.S. needs to step up to the plate to support the entry of Palestine into the United Nations and also support what the Arab League and the Muslim nations are all calling for now, which is a weapons embargo, a complete halt to the flow of weapons to Israel.
Now, here's the thing. I agree with what she's saying. However, I have to, again, quote the haunting words from Bassem Youssef, right? Funny comedian. Definitely put Piers Morgan in his place, not once, but twice. Israel's going to get away with this, okay? I'm so sorry. To all the protesters, too. I understand. Hell, you have the right to protest, but Israel's going to get away with it. Nothing's going to happen. And all these embargoes until people really decide to step up and address this crisis that's going on there, nothing will change. Nothing will change. Nothing will change. War never changes.
Israel, and at the same time calling for UN peacekeepers to intervene to guarantee the security all around of all sides, but especially of the Palestinians and the people in Gaza.
Desiree, you wrote, they can't cease fire. They already are selling their property on the West Bank to private investors who have their eyes on the prize of the massive oil reserves that they're salivating over. Yep, the West Bank, and then there's also Gaza too. So there's two different locations. Remember, I'll never forget that in that interview where Bassem Youssef mentioned to Piers Morgan about the olive trees, the olive trees that are there in the West Bank. Some of them 800 years old. 800 years old. That's a miracle of nature. Only for them to get uprooted and concrete be put in the remains. 800 years. Think about what they've seen during their time. What was happening around them? So many stories to tell.
And the people in West Bank who are basically sitting ducks now to the abuse of this rogue, fascist, ethno-nationalist state that has just been off the charts in abusing human rights now. So this needs to stop now. Don't wait. This is outrageous that our president continues to wait and allows tragedy upon tragedy, genocide upon genocide to be heaped on the people of Gaza. This needs to stop immediately and demand compliance with international law on the part of everyone, but that means in particular on the part of Israel, an end to the genocide, an end to the ethnic cleansing, an end to the forced displacement and the occupation and the apartheid state. This needs to end now, and this crisis must not be allowed to continue forward. Thank you.
Now, as much as I like to agree with Jill Stein, I'm so sorry. Great words I agree with. And I am ever hopeful to actually see her in a debate stage. Dare I say it? Hey, libertarians, why don't you invite Dr. Jill Stein to your event, which I'm pretty sure that they would be on board for. I hope. I'm actually hopeful for this debate between RFK Jr. and Trump. I truly do want to see it. And I would like to see the libertarians have their nominee up too. But besides that, getting back on point, let's talk about what the State Department has to say, because, hey, it's always important to get another perspective. Take it away, Count Chocula.
It is also true that a lot of the harm to civilians is because of the way Hamas decided to embed itself in the civilian population in the first place. That in no way changes the burden on the government visits we've made.
But respectfully, Matt, I mean, they're dead because the armed forces of Israel killed them.
Going after Hamas fighters who are hiding behind civilians. That has been true since day one. It remains true today. Go ahead.
Now, as made clear by members of the Israeli government, hey, instead of using precision missiles that never kill anybody or innocent civilians, they're going to use unprecise missiles. Say it with me, folks. What could possibly go wrong?
The back.
Just to follow up on his question, your answer makes it sound like it's an okay number for 40,000.
That is not at all a fair reading of what I said. I made quite clear that we have made quite clear for months and months and months that far too many Palestinians have been killed in this conflict. And we have engaged with the government of Israel to bring down the level of civilian death and convince them to take additional steps to reduce civilian harm. When we look at the operation in Rafah, it is a landscape like no other, both because of the way people are densely packed into such a small area, people from Gaza City, people from Khan Yunis, and unlike with respect to an operation in Gaza City or Khan Yunis, there's nowhere for them to evacuate to. And that is a critical difference when it comes to a Rafah operation that didn't exist for previous ones.
So the Israeli army says that it has the munitions it needs for the Rafah operation and for any planned operations. Does that mean, do you think that is their way of saying we will go into Rafah?
I will
It's a disaster.
let them speak for themselves on those.
And they're going to do it. They're going to do it. By the way, here's another full exchange you guys should hear about whether or not whether the United States should fully halt all shipments of weapons. Take it away, Count Chocula. Show us who you really are.
Go about the word leverage, that you don't love that word. But President Biden's announcement about the arms shipment, I think, would be seen by most people as the most assertive move toward trying to rein Israel in. With approximately 35,000 people dead, approximately 80% of the population of Gaza displaced, and the UN saying there's a fully blown famine in the north. What do you say to critics who say that such a move should have come earlier?
So I spoke to this earlier and said that our policy responds to the facts on the ground. We made clear at the outset of this conflict, we wanted to see Israel defeat Hamas. We wanted to see Israel dismantle Hamas and prevent its ability to launch the terrorist attacks of October 7th again. They've largely succeeded in that goal.
Now, here's what, again, the State Department still refuses to acknowledge. But hey, I remember covering this story, how the New York Times did an article. I'm surprised they even did that article. You know, it's an authoritative source of news. How the New York Times did an article saying how the Israeli government and intel services were made aware that something was going to go ahead and happen. And this was a year ago. So they were given a heads up. And look, to quote Charlie Kirk here, because he's been there. And while I disagree with a lot of things Charlie Kirk says, hey, here's something that made me question, like, gee, I wonder. Gaza, open air prison, high walls, watchtowers, barbed wire fences, concrete walls, security cameras, drones all over the place. I mean, they had that thing on lockdown. How'd you not see this haymaker coming? Now, I get it. Sometimes, you don't see a punch to the left side of your face. You don't see it sometimes. Sometimes you get a sneak attack, right? But you were given that heads up. Everything's working in your favor. Was the stand down order given? Why was everything so lackadaisical? And just again, before October 7th, you do realize Netanyahu had a lot of domestic issues and people protesting his government. He needed a wag the dog moment.
As I said, Hamas could not launch attacks again today. We also respond to the increasing civilian death toll, and while we've seen the daily count come down because of steps that Israel's taken that we have urged, it hasn't come down enough. And so when you look at all of those things in total, that leads us to believe that an operation going forward would have enormous impact on civilian harm. And I do just want to say, again, every time I get this question about the number of civilians that died in this conflict, it gets posed to me as a question about the government of Israel. And remember, it is Hamas that hides behind civilians. It's Hamas that has built tunnels under hospitals and schools and mosques, and at times hides in those facilities and puts civilians at harm's way. So I get there are very fair questions about how Israel has conducted this war, and I stand here and answer them, and the Israeli government answers them too. But it is also true that a lot of the harm to civilians is because of the way Hamas decided to embed itself in the civilian population in the first place. That in no way changes the burden on the government of Israel.
But respectfully, Matt, I mean, they're dead because the armed forces of Israel killed them.
going after Hamas fighters who are hiding behind civilians. That has been true since day one. It remains true today. Go ahead. In the back.
Just to follow up on his question, your answer makes it.
So, will there be a halt in shipments? It will look like it, but they won't stop. To quote Bassem Youssef, Israel's going to get away with it. Okay? And unfortunately, what we are going to witness in Rafah is going to be so horrific, which is why probably Congress has moved so fast to remove TikTok. And no one should be cheering. No one should be cheering for any social media platform to be attacked just the way Congress did towards TikTok. As after all, you had Anthony Blinken and Mitt Romney said it ruined Israel's PR image, even though you had people in the IDF posting very horrific imagery of their actions on TikTok. They didn't help themselves out, now did they? Didn't help themselves out at all. Look, I don't know what lies in store for us, especially further on down the road. I do fear that the censorship will intensify to 11. I do think that things are going to start getting uglier and uglier and uglier before it starts getting better. But if we are truly going to have a democracy and a republic, we need to start breaking away from the two-party system.